All right, good morning. We are day 21. We're like two-thirds of the way done. So 10 more days. I'm going to start us with prayer. We're going to launch in. Lord, we just thank you again for just your mercies that are new every morning. That you are a huge, possibly huge miracle working God that we cannot even fathom. And that not only are you able to do all the things, but you love to do them for us because your love is um, without end. So we just put ourselves in your hands, looking and expecting for you to just keep working that miraculous love out on our behalves for our good. And we just thank you for your ability to turn all the things into something that is good, that every problem has a promise hidden in it and a blessing and an upgrade. We just have to be tenacious enough to look for it. So give us courage to trust, even in the midst of what seems like awful and painful, hard circumstances, to trust that there are gifts hidden within them and that we would press in for them with joyful expectation. In your name, amen. I was writing the notes yesterday as we had talked about 2 Chronicles 22, and I was posting it, and I did not said this in the thing, but as I was writing, it kind of came to me. I was like, that like approaching those three approaching armies that seem like an enemy and a battle was just really like the delivery trucks for all the blessing, because they didn't have to fight the battle, the Israelites. And then at the end of the day, they had 3 days. Once these guys took themselves out, they had 3 days worth of treasures to take home. And I'm like, there have been times in my life where I'm like, okay, all looks really bad, but what if this isn't bad? What if this is just God bringing me an upgrade and things that I need? Like, what if He doesn't need me to do anything? I don't need to worry. It's all just like, I started imagining like, even like, um, what if your FedEx guy came to the door, but he looked like super scary, but he was just a delivery driver. But every time you're like, I'm not going to open it. And he's like, I have a gift for you. And you're like, no, I don't want to take it. I'm not going to sign for it. I'm not going to receive it because you look crazy scary, And, all kinds of whatever your worst nightmare is. He's dressed in a clown suit. I don't know. But like, whatever it is, you're like, I'm not opening the door. And God's like, I'm just bringing you like to your doorstep. You just need to like open the door, and he'll leave. He's not going to touch your house, but it's just the delivery truck, it's just the delivery driver. And so I had not thought about that till yesterday's conversation and kind of processing it. I'm like, sometimes we just don't like the looks of the delivery driver, but what if they're just bringing us the things that we've prayed and asked for, and they're just wrapped in scary delivery guys. So anyways, so speaking of that, I'm going to go again to a story that we know really well. But I think sometimes when I look at stories that I know and I kind of go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But then sometimes if I can look at it with a fresh perspective, like one time I started reading all these stories with the perspective of identity, and understanding people acting out of false identity. And then as they become Christians or whatever, looking at these New Testament stories, when they would act out of different identities in themselves, and like when they were knowing that they were fully loved, how they could act differently. So I'd actually really I saw the same stories in a new way with this idea of identity as the Lord was teaching me about identity, right? So I think sometimes we have a theme or something God's teaching us, and if we take that same idea and like look at stories with that lens, different things come to the surface. So today I want to look at the story of Lazarus, again with the idea of the 3P kind of experiment, like praying God and thanking Him in advance of seeing anything happen, the idea of decrees, the idea of imagining bigger than we imagined, and God's goodness and things. So let's kind of look at this one more time with a few of these kind of thoughts behind it. Um, so of course, and I'm going to summarize a bunch of this, but I'm reading out of John 11, but Jesus had heard that, Lord, he whom you love is ill. So Lazarus is ill, but Jesus said, oh, let's see. Yes, this doesn't lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified. So first off, he even kind of gives a prophetic word. He won't die. But he didn't say he won't die. He said it won't lead to death. It won't end in death, right? What is it? It won't lead to death. It won't. So the end result will not be death. If we're being specific, we would assume that means he's not going to die. Like, that would be a logical assumption. Like, right. But I think if we're being really specific,
I think he's saying the end result will not be death. It doesn't necessarily mean that the path will not be death. Like, I don't know. That's an interesting question, right? Because we know Jesus doesn't lie. So I don't think he's intentionally being obtuse or tricky, but I think he's saying, I'm gonna give you a promise that you can hold on to even when the reality looks different. And I heard somebody would say once there's news and there's truth. The news may be that you have cancer, but the truth is God is a healer, right? So the truth that we live in is higher than the news that we see and hear. So he gives this promise of his heart, and we know his love for them, that and really the vision that God's going to be glorified. This Jesus, the Son of God, is going to be glorified through this. Like he already tells you what God is going to do through this. We don't know how God's going to be glorified, but they can pray and thank God into that place, right? So Jesus loved them, all three of them. So when he heard, he stayed 2 days longer, which is such a weird juxtaposition. I love you, so I'm not going to come help you. Like that is like the ultimate thing that parents say. Like that is so hard to hear. I love you, so you're on your own on this one. Like, I mean, this is like an intervention, right? I love you, so I'm going to let you reap the consequences of this, and I'm not going to keep enabling you. It's a really hard statement, and because through that, um, they die. Lazarus dies. So he mentions people are asking like, aren't there 12 hours in the day if he wants to see da, da, da. But he said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Which again, there are people that have such faith that they just seem like they are in denial. It's like that Monty Python skit where they like cut the arm off. It's like, it's just a scratch, it's a flesh wound. It's really easy to feel like this is totally denial. Like he's just sleeping, he's not really hurt, he's only mostly dead, he's not what, and so people are like, he's not taking this seriously. And I think sometimes there are people that are in denial, and it looks the exact same. Faith and like stupidity really look the exact same most of the time. And that's a hard one because you really have to have a relationship with the Lord to know. Jesus had to have such a close relationship with God that the truth or the news did not affect what he knew was true. And that all comes down to relationship with the Father. So this type said, well, if he's only fallen asleep, he'll recover. But Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. So they didn't even understand. So he's saying fallen asleep, but he's not saying he's sleeping. He's saying, okay, this death is not permanent, right? So all the way through, people are having two totally different conversations, right? He's having a heavenly one about bigger things, and they're having an earthly one. So then Jesus plainly says, he's died. Like, I'm just saying he's dead. And for your sake, I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you may believe. Let us go. And this is the phrase that I think is so interesting. I'm glad that I wasn't there. And that seems really, again, if you think about a loving parent, if somebody's like, well, I'm glad you got sick and lost your house and what, like, I'm glad I wasn't there to help bail you out. That doesn't seem loving. And it isn't if it's punishing. If God was just punishing them for something, that would not be loving, but he's not. Actually, what he's doing is giving them an upgrade. So they already, and just a little history here, they knew that God had already healed the sick. We've seen that. He'd done all these miracles. So you see all the way through this passage, they'll be like, if you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. They all had faith for that. However, they didn't have faith that he could raise the dead. They'd never seen that done. The other thing is, who's about to die? Jesus. So they are literally about to go into a season where if they've never seen Jesus raise the dead, how are they going to have any glimmer of hope when he dies? That will look completely final. It still felt final when it happened, but there's a seed because they've seen him raise the dead. Like, is it possible that this is the end? I mean, I think they just needed the tiniest bit of hope so that when he raised, there was like, okay, I didn't know he could do that, but like maybe I've heard echoes of that possibility in my head, right? So he knew that he would need this for what was coming. He also knows, like, how are you going to pray for the sick if you don't think this can happen? Like, right? I mean, they needed an upgrade. Baby steps. He's been showing them what he's capable of. To go to the next step, though, you have to like be pushed a little further. You have to experience. If you always just heal the sick, you never know what he has authority over the dead. They would never have learned that if he hadn't allowed it to go a step further. If I know that God can provide through my job, then how do I know he'll provide without me having a job? If I lose my job, then I'm terrified because I've always expected the job to do it, but also I lose my job and then God shows himself faithful and he has another way out, and I go, okay, you have other ways of providing, right? So all of these things are just giving us more confidence of his ability to provide. or to heal or whatever it is that we need from him. So in his mercy, he allowed this to happen so that he could show them. I would say yesterday, it was like, I allowed this to happen so that I could give you more resources that you need. This one, it's so that I can increase your faith and your confidence in who I am. Not only for your work on the earth, but also for what's about to happen to me. So Lazarus, I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you may believe, but let's go to him. So now he's like, but let me give you that faith that you need, right? So they go, and then the disciples are like, let's go so we can die with him. Like they're all like, they know that this is the temperature isn't great around there, and they're aware like we're all signing our death warrant. So, but Jesus comes, he finds Lazarus in the tomb. So this is the other important thing. Bodies would start to decay, but people at that time didn't have like the technology that we did. So if somebody was in a deep coma, you might not know. And I mean, this is where that the bell ringer comes from, because we, even in America, would bury bodies because they would be like in a coma and they would be alive. And then people would come back to life. Well, eventually they would need to recycle the tombs and they would find scratch marks. I mean, this is so gruesome to me. It's like the most horrific thing. People would come out of comas and realize they're stuck underground in a tomb and would try to get out, didn't get out of their graves. So they started putting bells inside. So you're a dead ringer is like that phrase of being able to ring the bell when you're in the coffin in case you weren't fully dead when they buried you. So this was way pre those days, right? I mean, I'm talking about early American history. We go way back to biblical time. They didn't always understand if somebody looked dead, but they weren't, right? So how did you know? 3 days after you've been buried, the body would start to stink. So this is why they're like, whoa, 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 like he's not mostly dead. The body will have decayed and stunk by now. He has been in the grave for 4 days and they've already embalmed him. They've done all the things. And so, and wrapped him up. But I think there's a powerful thing about, he wasn't just raised from the dead a day after he died when they might've said, well, maybe we got it wrong and he wasn't fully dead. At this point, we know he is like stinky dead. He is fully dead. There's no debate on that. Also, how long was God in the tomb? He was in the tomb for 3 days. So I think there's a lot here of timing that's actually really prophetic and important. So he dies. Hello, Barb, welcome. So he's in the tomb 4 days. They go, and Martha, they all know, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And Martha says, but even now, whatever you ask from God, I know I will give you. So Martha totally understands, as much as we've given her a bad rap for being so busy and blah, 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 and not sitting at the feet of Jesus. Maybe she's learned her lesson. I don't know, but she absolutely understood here with faith that, and again, I think that only comes out of her intimacy with the Lord, that he absolutely could still have authority over this. And so Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And she's like, oh, well, I know in the resurrection, like and she understands such a kingdom long-term perspective. She can have faith that I understand in heaven. And Jesus like, no, this is going to be now. Like this can even be now. And she says, yes, I believe you're the Christ, whatever. So they have this conversation. She sort of gets it future, doesn't fully expect it today, right? She's kind of just tried to resign herself to God's goodness, even if I'm sad right now. But she goes and gets Mary. And so let's see. And again, she says the same thing. If you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. So Jesus was moved to compassion. He weeps. We know this. Where did you put him? And people it's not just Mary and Martha. So often the things that happen for us aren't for us. They're for the watching world, right? So they're all like, okay, this guy who like healed everybody else, if he'd have just been here, surely he could have kept him from dying. Everyone's recognizing you could have kept him from the problem. And I think so often we get frustrated because we know God can keep us from our problems. And God's like, his point here was not to keep them from the problem. It was to demonstrate his glory and his power through the problem. Again, back to our original comment that our problems are often just really scary looking delivery men. So take away the stone and then so this is the odor part, right? Lord, it will stink. He's been dead 4 days. Like we know that he is dead because of decomposition. And he says, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? He's like, I'm not just talking about later. And I love David's like, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And when I'm in dark places, I hold to that because this is not just a future hope. I think so often I just think it's a future hope. It's not, it's today hope. So he says, and here's the 3P, right? Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I say this for everyone else watching because they need to know this, right? that they may believe that you sent me. And then he does what we've talked about, so many things, right? He starts with gratitude. He knows that God hears him, and then he declares. And he doesn't ask, he doesn't beg, would you mind? Could you do this? Lazarus, come out. And there's such a declaration of faith and confidence here. And again, he can do that because of his intimacy with the Father. He knows what God is doing here. And the man who had died came out. He was all bound up. He's wrapped. He can't see. And God's like, take his grave clothes off and let's let him go. Like, I love the practical help of that. Like, okay. And I wonder, I've never had this thought before. I wonder how much like y'all come help was, it's like when magicians are like, here, you come in and you touch this and you feel this and know that I'm not doing any special tricks, right? Is this a real coin? I think there's a sense of let's bring everybody else in and let them have the tactile experience of taking off the grave clothes. You will see that it was the right man. Lazarus was bound up. I didn't switch a body. There's no fake trickery here. This is the real deal. And so he's allowing them to enter into the process for that, like grounding of the miracle in their hearts. And to take away, anybody's suspicion of what could have happened. So, anyways, we're going to stop there. I think it's such a beautiful story, but I think that just, again, to look at it with these lenses of this was a horrible thing. Everyone knew he could have stopped it. And he chose not to. And it wasn't out of cruelty. It wasn't because he was punishing. It wasn't any of those things. And he kept saying, I'm glad I'm not there. And you're like, that feels so punishing. Just going to let you suffer. Like, you can work yourself out on this one, kids. He's not punishing his children here. He is saying, I've got to show you something more that you need. Trust me with this. This is the gift that I'm giving you. And it is wrapped up. The only way for you to get this gift is for me to wrap it up. And it wouldn't mean so much if he'd healed some random person they didn't care about. He had to do it with someone that was, the story had to be about the people who it mattered to, because they had to go through this journey. And again, they were the ones who would have need of this confidence later. And so it was just such a gift. And he prayed with praise and thanksgiving before even started. Whatever you do, Lord, like he knew God would raise him, and he was able to declare with confidence what God was going to do because he knew what God was trying to teach him. But there was a prayerful, grateful thanksgiving that started even from the beginning. So all the way through, I'm glad this is happening for you. I mean, he was thanking God for the struggle and the gifts that would be in it from the beginning, which I just find super challenging. So that's what I have today. Any thoughts? Anybody? Anybody have a scary FedEx driver? Just kidding.
I have a question. Just
Yeah.
When Jesus asks, where they had put Lazarus's body, he knew that. I wonder why he asked the question.
I know he could have
a thought,
but I have a couple, and anybody else looking away on this. Of course, I don't know, but I think first off, Jesus came as a man. So he had prophetic revelation on the things that mattered, but maybe he didn't know where they had laid him. Maybe he didn't need to know. Like he knew it was buried, but maybe he hadn't been to that place yet. Or so maybe that wasn't revelation that he had asked the Lord for. Like he knew what God was going to do, but he didn't know where it would happen. Right. So I think there's a beauty in that even Jesus needed to ask some questions sometimes. Right. He didn't have all the answers. So he could have, but but we're in community. So God didn't give him all the answers for everything because that's part of the community thing. He gave him what he needed to know. That's the super practical or spiritual answer. The more practical answer would be possibly, again, he's trying to be fully man with them. It would be really weird if he walked around and knew he would be like really insufferable if he knew everything and never was in community enough to depend on other people. Right. So if he went around like, I know where he's buried, I know where I'm going, I know where, like, that would be insufferable. Let's be honest. But I think it also allows them to go, they needed to take him to their place of grief. And I think there's a beautiful thing in that. Like sometimes he asks us questions, where are you hurting? Show me what's going on. He knows. Sure, he knows, the Father knows, but he still allows us to dialogue with him and to take him. They could have said, it's too hard, I don't want to go to the grave. You would have missed out on the miracle. Sometimes I think the Lord, and I love this question because I've never thought about that, Darla, but I think there's a beautiful point there that we have to be willing to take the Lord to our place of grief and pain and our deepest intimate struggles and allow him into that place if we're going to see what he's going to transform it into. If we protect ourselves from that pain by saying, I don't want to go there, this is painful, then we miss out on the miracles of what he can transform it into. So
I like that. Thank you.
I do too. I do too. I've never thought of that. Thanks. Anybody else have any thoughts? Let me pray for us and then we'll stop the recording if anybody else wants to comment after. Lord, I thank you so much. Even for that just last question, because gosh, that's got me really that one landed deep, Lord, that so often we just don't want to go back to the things, the hopes and dreams we've buried, the things that we feel like have died, the relationships that are lost, there's a graveyard full of stuff that we think is too dead, too buried, too stinky to be resurrected, and things that we're avoiding because it's just really painful. And I know there's been a few times where you've invited me into a place and like I had to really be honest with you that I don't trust you sometimes to meet me in my pain. I don't trust you to protect me and to be good for me in those places. And so I've really had to face that has been a truth in my life that I'm like, let's just not go there because I don't trust you in that place. So, Lord, I thank you that we have this little question of where's he buried, so that because you wanted to come with us in our places of pain and hurt and suffering, and you didn't want to just stay there with us, but first you weep with us, you understand, you ache with us, you feel our pain. You're not trite, you don't just wipe it away, you actually grieve with us in that place of loss because you know that's never what this world was not created for loss and grief. So you grieve with us for the brokenness, but then you also bring hope. And Lord, there was echoes at the beginning all along of what you could do, and but everyone misunderstood what you planned to do. Some thought it would be for later, some thought it was metaphorical, some thought you were like using metaphors and stuff. But Lord, we misunderstand you all the time, and even I love that he just they didn't believe that you would raise the dead. You just believe they believed that would be a future thing. And you said something about what was it in the Bible? There was this verse, I missed it. If you had only believed, what is it? He says, it was super because they hadn't believed, and yet the Lord did it for them anyways. I'll have to look for it in a minute. But Lord, that just even though sometimes you want our belief and you say that our unbelief will get in the way, even still, you showed up and did these miracles and they didn't believe, they didn't know, they didn't understand, and that you still wanted to show them who you are. So you were inviting us into a place of belief, but you aren't limited by our unbelief. So Lord, we stand here like the man who said, I believe, but help my unbelief. Help us to understand and interpret correctly your promises and your prophetic words and what you're telling us you're going to do. And yet there's mercy when we get it wrong, and you still show up and show us what you're capable of. So we just thank you for your goodness and your mercy, and how much bigger you are than we have believed you to be. And you have never been offended by that, but you just keep showing us, let me show you more of what I can do for you. Let me show you more of my power. Lord, let us come with grateful hearts and faithful hearts, totally trusting in who you are for us. In your name, amen. All right. I'm like, where was I? I saw that and then I realized we didn't talk about that. I was so surprised because I read that today and I'm like, there was something about if you had believed. I'm going to put it in the notes, or I'll put it in a Facebook post so I don't take a ton of time. But there was something that I read this morning and I'm like, oh man, there was just this weird comment about belief. And it was almost like a little bit of a reproach, maybe. Oh, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? That's what it is. Didn't I tell you if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And it almost seems like a reproach. So they took away the stone and he says, Lord, I thank you that you hear me. Da, 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 you may believe. Lazarus, come forth. It sounded like he was saying a conditional promise. If you had believed, you would see the glory. Like you would expect at that point for it to follow up with, so never mind, I'm out. You don't believe I can do this. You lost your chance. He's not saying that. Like, it's this gentle, like, if you had believed, you would see. Let me show you. I believe, so we'll see. Like, your faith isn't on the line. Mine's enough. But like, maybe he's telling them, hey, maybe you could have done this for yourself even if you had just believed. I don't know. But there's like this little bit of comment, like, don't fail. Like they kind of said they believe, but they don't understand. And they sort of believe, they kind of don't. But he's like, hey, I told you this. Let me show you. Let me show you. He doesn't walk away because they didn't believe. He just fills in what they lack. And I really loved that today. So, all right, I'm going to stop the recording.